Spade back here with you, High Noon Leatherworks, for another leather adventure. So today we're going to continue the child's leather cuffs that I'm making as a project. And we're going to, last episode we made the pattern. We're going to transfer that to our leather today, cut that out, and get that ready for the next step. So come on in and let's get started. Here's our pattern that we made on the last episode for the child's cuffs. Obviously it's too small for me, but you get the idea. And we're going to transfer that to our leather today. And I've got two pieces of leather, and when I transfer this, I am using an ink pen. Transferring it by tracing my pattern, but I'm not going to move that pattern until I get all of my pattern marks on there. And by pattern marks, I want to get obviously the outside around the pattern, but I also want to get my holes for my lacing. I've got those in my pattern too. To me it's just easier to measure them, put them in my pattern, and then they're always going to be the same every time I use this pattern. Then my lacing is going to look very uniform from project to project. So you can see how it has the lacing holes already marked, so I know exactly where to punch. So there's the first one, and again I'm going to use the same pattern on my second piece of leather, and that way I know both of them, both cuffs are going to end up being exactly the same. Same shape, same dimension. So we'll have an exact matching pair. So I'll come across, do the outside just like I did before, and then I'll mark my lacing holes. And then there's that piece of leather. So I can set my pattern aside. Done with my pen for tracing. I can go ahead and pick up my knife and start cutting out my leather by following those lines. And I've talked about this before, where I do use an ink pen, so I don't see as good as I used to. So by using an ink pen, I can really see my lines on my leather after I trace my pattern. And I've talked about this before, where once I've cut this out and I bevel it, that any of that ink line is going to be gone anyway, so you're not going to see it. So I'm going to come up, follow this line, and this is where it gets a little tricky sometimes, because you're going to make a curve. That line curves right there. Notice how I keep turning my material instead of, like, I'm still sitting down, so instead of standing up and trying to move or twist my body, I just stay in the position I'm in and keep turning the material as I cut. So really my cutting angle with my knife doesn't really change. I just keep rotating the material. And you notice I don't go very fast. And it normally takes a couple of passes to get all the way through the material. And if you take your time on that first pass, your second pass, that blade of that knife will just follow that groove that you just cut in there. So you don't have to, just try not to go too fast, and then you won't have to worry about following that inked line from your pattern again, because you're going to be in the groove of your first cut. And as long as you don't go too fast, it goes right through there. So there's my first cuff. And there's that little extra we did to it, just to give it a little character up here at the top instead of being straight across down here. So let's take our second one, do the same thing. And for each project, I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but I always start out each project with a new utility blade. I don't even worry about how many times it's been used before or anything. I always just put a new one in it before I get started. And then that way I know I've got a good sharp blade to do my cutting for the project. Again, my first pass, you can tell it's not near as fast as my second pass. Because I'm just probably cutting, maybe a 1/16 of an inch down into that leather. But on the second pass, that allows me to go much quicker, and it cuts very nicely all the way through the leather. So it's a little extra work. I could probably cut through it all in the first pass, but I'd have to go much slower and put a lot more pressure on my blade, and I feel like it's much better if I do 2 passes and then come back and finish on the second pass. So there's the second one. So now I have a pair, and the next step is I'm ready to put my lacing holes in, and I need to make sure which punch I need to use for my lace. So let me grab a piece of lace. This is leather lace, and what I'll do is I'll take a piece of this scrap that I just cut off, so I know it's exactly the same thickness as my cuffs. And let me get another scrap piece to put under it, and I'll go ahead and punch 2 holes, different sizes here. One punching a 5/32 hole, and I'm punching a 3/16 hole. So there's 5/32, punch 3/16. And then that'll tell me which one I need to use to actually go around. So I'll take my piece of lace. It goes in and out of the 3/16 very easily, but it fits in the 5/32 great. Really fits in. It goes in and out easily, but there's no slop. So I'm going to use the smaller 5/32 punch for my lacing holes, and I can go ahead and start with either piece. It doesn't really matter. Make sure I have my 5/32 punch because I put it back up, and I do. Make sure that I am around that ink mark that I put in there with the ink pen on my pattern. And you can probably see on the camera where all those little pieces of poster board that I knocked those holes into my pattern are starting to pop out of my punch. Last one's being a stubborn one. And here we go. Must have had a real soft spot on my scrap piece. So there's all the holes in one side of that cuff, all punched through for the lacing. We can flip it over to the other side. I think I'm going to switch to my other mallet. Seems like I have a little more control with it being flat. It's just not as heavy. There we go. And you can put a little beeswax on the end of your punch if you want, on the outside, and it'll let it release a little easier. And this mallet's not as heavy. And once it goes through, it really goes through. I think I'm going to put a little beeswax, if I can find out what I did with it. There it is. I'm going to put a little bit on there so that releases a little bit better. And I'm just taking that beeswax and putting it right on the outside of that sharp edge. And you see how much easier that just pulled out. You can see it's pulling out much easier than it was before, just from that little bit of beeswax. It's just like when you're punching holes, you finally get a rhythm. And you know, if you're doing quite a few of them like this, you finally get a rhythm, and you can kind of feel, you start to feel when that punch gets through the leather. My beeswax is wearing out. Alright, so that's all of the lacing holes in both pieces, or both cuffs. So I've cut out my leather pieces. They're done, except for, obviously I have to put my beveling on there, and we'll do that next time. And then we've got our holes cut out, or punched out, for our lacing. Our next step is completed on the child's leather cuffs project, and we've got our pattern used, our cuffs cut out, our lacing holes placed in, punched in, and we're ready to move on to the next step. So I appreciate you coming in with me, spending a little bit of time going over this project to this point, and please come back next week and check out the next steps. So we'll just be that much closer to the completed project. So like I always say, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.